July 1775, nearly 3 months after the occupation of Boston, the city received a jolt of good news. The Second Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, voted to form a military force. And as commander of the new Continental Army, they chose George Washington.
Phillis Wheatley was in Providence, Rhode Island in the fall of 1775 when she sat down to write probably the most consequential poem of her career. Her latest inspiration was a tribute to the new Generalissimo of the armies of North America, His Excellency George Washington. It was a bold step for the confident young poet. She took it upon herself to become the voice of Boston, welcoming the general to the fight, showering him with accolades, crowning him with glory befitting the savior of a city. On behalf of her community, Phillis Wheatley wanted the general to know that the hopes of Boston were riding on his shoulders. The poem and letter were dated October 26, 1775, from Providence.
Sir, I have taken the freedom to address Your Excellency in the enclosed poem an entreat of acceptance. Thou I am not insensible of its inaccuracies. Your being appointed by the Grand Continental Congress to be Generalissimo of the armies of North America, together with your fame of your virtues, excites sensations not easy to suppress. Your generosity, therefore, I presume will pardon the attempt. Wishing Your Excellency all possible success in the great cause you are so generously engaged in, I am Your Excellency's most obedient humble servant, Phillis Wheatley. To His Excellency General Washington. Fixed are those eyes of nations on the scales, for in their hopes Columbia's arm prevails. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine, with gold unfading, Washington be thine.
General Washington had his aides send the letter and the poem to the Virginia Gazette, who published them on March 20th, 1776. Then, General Washington took a startling and unprecedented step. On February 28, 1776, the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, a Virginia aristocrat and slave owner, sat down to write what was the most extraordinary letter of his career. General Washington composed a personal message to Phillis Wheatley, thanking her for her letter and, in particular, the poem. According to Washington biographer Joseph Ellis, it was the only occasion in his correspondence when he directly addressed a slave.
Then Washington offered Phillis a startling proposal. If you should ever come to Cambridge or near headquarters, I shall be happy to see a person so favored by the Muses, and to whom nature has been so liberal and beneficent in her dispensations. His closing was warm and gracious. I am, with great respect, your obedient, humble servant. It was the first time in his life, perhaps the only time, that George Washington ever gave a black person the unusual distinction of an invitation to pay him a social visit.
The only report we have on Wheatley's visit to Washington was from a journalist who wrote this report after visiting the house himself and talking to the owner. This is what he wrote. Washington invited her to visit him at Cambridge, which she did a few days before the British evacuated Boston. She passed half an hour with the commander-in-chief, from whom and his officers she received marked attention. Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer Ron Chernow offers the most accurate assessment we have. Chernow writes, Washington appears to have received Phillis Wheatley at his Cambridge headquarters in March with a very courteous reception. With her literary tribute to George Washington, Phillis Wheatley marched directly into the thick of the war effort, supporting the Patriots' cause with the best weapon at her disposal, her soaring verses.
The poem offered something new, an allegorical innovation credited to Phillis Wheatley. She appropriated the Greek-influenced name Columbia land of Columbus, then commonly used by the British press to refer to the British colonies in America. The mother country was called Britannia. Wheatley reimagined the name Columbia to give it an entirely new and richer meaning. The poet saw Columbia as a vivid visual character, a woman endowed with mystical celestial qualities. The poet saw Columbia as a vivid visual character, a woman endowed with mythical celestial qualities. In her artistic vision, Columbia became a goddess with divine authority, a powerful warrior wrapped in heavenly light who came to lead the fight for freedom. With this novel touch, Phillis Wheatley gave the first personification of America as a nation.
Celestial core, enthroned in realms of light, Columbia's scenes of glorious toils are right. The goddess comes, she moves divinely fair, olive and laurel binds her golden hair. Wherever shines this native of skies, unnumbered charms and recent graces rise.
It was an unprecedented image at the time, but soon the Wheatley depiction of Columbia became an iconic figure. Lady Columbia, portrayed as a shining goddess draped in classical garments, sometimes carrying an American flag and sometimes the torch of liberty, became the leading symbol for America. Miss Columbia came to represent the spirit of the country and American ideal. About the time of World War II, Miss Columbia fell out of favor as a stand-in for America, replaced by the Statue of Liberty and Uncle Sam. But for a century and a half after Phillis Wheatley's Miss Columbia appeared as a virtuous goddess in a flowing robe, the image had a glorious run as the symbol of the land of liberty. It was perhaps Phillis Wheatley's most enduring gift to the American spirit.
Sometime in the fall of 1779, Phillis decided to concentrate on the business of poetry. Phillis Wheatley was facing some hard times. She was no longer an exotic African child prodigy. She was a free Black woman in her mid-20s with no marketable skills. There were no prominent white patrons to sponsor, no more wealthy intellects to invite her to tea and to celebrate her talent. She was on her own.
Phillis had been writing continually since her first book was published in 1773. 6 years later, she had dozens of new poems for her second book. She chose 32 previously unpublished poems to include in her book, along with her highly regarded tribute to George Washington, plus 13 of her letters.
Phillis remained determined to show her growth as a poet with greater depth and maturity. Her second collection of writings would be her best yet. This book would show the self-assured artistry of an accomplished poet, a writer of sophistication and polish in promoting the grand theme of freedom for all. Her second book would be very different from her first. Many poems in her 1773 book had been written when she was a teenager and still a legal slave. In stark contrast, nearly all poems in her 1779 collection were written by a free woman in her 20s. This would be a collection of entirely new material. She wanted to showcase her literary gifts at their finest.
1779 was not a good time for poetry and literature. The war for independence was heating up, and the economic climate was growing more desperate. Phillis's 1979 book was never published. Tragically, of the 33 poems she listed in her 1779 book proposal, only 7 have survived. The remaining 26 poems have been lost to history. The year 1784 was pivotal in American history. Peace negotiations with Britain, which began after the British surrender at Yorktown in 1781, finally concluded in the Treaty of Paris on September 3, 1783. When Congress ratified the Treaty of Paris in January 1784, American independence became a reality. Phillis Wheatley was probably among the Boston spectators at the ceremony in February 1784 that hailed the signing of the Treaty of Peace. For Phillis Wheatley and for Boston and for all Americans, The turmoil that they had suffered for nearly 20 years was now over. After Boston celebrated the Treaty of Paris, certifying a new, free, and independent nation, Phillis Wheatley wrote her most triumphal ode to America. In February 1784, her poem Liberty and Peace was published as a 4-page pamphlet.
The poem begins with a shout of joy. The exultant poet proclaims the good news. The long, bloody war was finally over. The most cherished aim of the patriots had been realized. She honors the success of the American Revolution by recognizing that the real victory belongs to the power of peace. Light has come and destroyed the darkness.
The sending peace and power of war confounds. From every tongue celestial, peace resounds. As for the east, illustrious king of day, with rising radiance drives the shades away. So freedom comes, arrayed with charms divine, and in her train commerce and plenty shine.
The last lines of Liberty and Peace call up the image of a flaming torch, the sacred light of freedom. That golden ray touches every part of the nation, bathing its people in divine glory.
Auspicious haven shall fill the favoring gales, where'er Columbia spreads her swelling sails. To every realm shall peace her charms display, and heavenly freedom spread her golden ray.
Wheatley has captured, perhaps for the first time in poetry, America's mission to the rest of the world. Even if Phillis Wheatley had not written any other poem, Liberty and Peace would merit serious consideration as one of the greatest literary achievements of this young nation. Celebrating the dawn of a new era, Liberty and Peace was Phillis Wheatley's last known poem. Phillis was alone. Her support system had completely vanished. During this time, she lost 2 of the 3 children born to her. With her husband out of the picture, Phillis had to find a way to support herself and her one remaining child. So she turned to what she did best. She placed an advertisement for a second volume of her writings in the September 1784 issue of the Boston Magazine. Phillis Wheatley's final push for her second book of poems went nowhere. 3 months after the advertisement for her book appeared, Phillis Wheatley was dead. A funeral notice ran in Boston on December 8, 1784.